theyeshiva.net.
Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Jacobson, thank you very much for joining me today on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
We're going to talk about what's typically called, and I'm using quotes here, off the derech. But as Rabbi Alex Israel said in a podcast I interviewed with him, in a podcast I did with him on a similar topic last year, perhaps a better way to describe it is people going on different drachim, a different way, as opposed to off the way. So before we start off, I'd like to define our terms, if it's okay. Could you define, and you could also reject the term as well if you like, what we mean when we say someone's off the derech?
I guess probably anyone who uses the term has to be asked what exactly they mean. It's not a term that is in Chumash or in Tanakh or even in Mishnayos that we have to struggle to sit and define. You know, the beginning of Maseches Pesachim, the Gemara spends a very long time trying to figure out the meaning of the word Or l'arba'as or Beit K'Mesacham. What's Or? Does Or mean light? Does it mean dark? Does it mean night, morning, day, afternoon? And it takes a long time till the Gemara has a resolution. So I'm not sure that we have to really search for the exact definition. Probably everybody has to be asked what they mean. If you just want to ask from a generic social point of view, I guess it would mean that people would say that a child or an individual rejected the path and the lifestyle of the people who raised them. I think that's basically what it means.
That's
and
perfectly
you can understand
fair.
what that means. You know, if somebody grew up in a modern Orthodox community, right, and they might look at a Satmar young man or young woman who went over the Derech, they wouldn't understand why is that called off the Derech, you know, just because they don't have, you know, a father once told me his son went over the Derech because he's not wearing a shtreimel on Shabbos. In another community, that's maybe on the Derech. So it's sometimes also relative, but I guess from a very general perspective, it's young men or women, you know, choosing or rejecting the particular lifestyle or path that they were raised with.
Very
and of
reasonable.
course, that comes in, you know, a million different colors.
I want to talk about some of those colors. And in fact, that's a good introduction to the next question, which is, do you believe that there is a type of continuum of observance? And by that, obviously, that's true. There certainly is a continuum. Some people are more observant than others. But some people look at Torah Judaism as an all or nothing, meaning you either are, again, on the derech or you're not. I mean, you're either doing what you should or you are not doing so. Do you think that that's a healthy way to look at observance, or do you think seeing it as a type of continuum where some people do more, some people do less, but we don't think of people as quote unquote religious or orthodox in a specific way? Is that healthier? How would you look at that issue?
I grew up with a story from my youth. The story still touches me and affects me deeply, I think in a very positive way, and certainly influenced my mindset. There was a group of secular students, university students. You're talking about the 1950s or 60s, so it's quite a long while ago. They came to visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And that was very common in those years that students, Jewish students, who often had many questions, came to the Rebbe, and they would be very blunt and ask all their questions. The Rebbe would engage in answers. They trusted him because of his background, not just in Torah, but also in sciences and secular wisdom, etc. So the story goes, this is what I heard many years ago. At the end of this conversation, which was very warm and open and friendly, one of the students decided maybe to ask what you would call a chutzpah question. And he looks at the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and I think he tried really, you know, what we call today stump the rabbi, right? Stump the Rebbe. And he said, when you look at me or you look at us, do you think we're good Jews or bad Jews? And in many ways, you know, how is the Rebbe supposed to answer, right? If he says, oh, you're good Jews, you know, which is the politically correct answer, really? You know, we don't put on tefillin, we don't keep Shabbos. Oh, so you're going to tell us we're bad Jews, right? Then, you know, that would defeat like the whole approach of the Rebbe and his whole purpose. And the answer that he gave was not only heartwarming, but also profoundly keen, and what I would call profound, wise. And he said to them, he said, the way I see Judaism is the vision of Jacob's ladder. Sula mutzav artza v'rosha magi hashamayim. It's a ladder that's etched on the earth, etched into the earth on the ground, and its top reaches heaven. This ladder consists of 613 rungs. All of us, all of the Jewish people, are on this ladder. We are situated. We are the link between heaven and earth. And then he said, sometimes you could look at two people on the same ladder. One person finds himself on step 612. The other person finds himself on step 2. Who's higher and who's lower? It's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. The Rebbe says, but wait, what if I tell you that yesterday the person who's on step 612 was on step 613? And the person who's on step 2 was on step 1. Who's higher, who's lower? So he says, I like to define these questions not as which step you're on, but which direction you're heading.
Mm-hmm. That's a very beautiful story. I appreciate your telling me that, Rabbi Jacobson. That's a profound and wise way of answering that particular question. Then let's move into some of those questions about the people who are going, so to speak, using the Rebbe's example, his metaphor, going down the ladder, becoming less observant. Can you outline, in your experience, some of the more prevalent reasons that people tend to become less observant? Are there specific reasons that this happens, whether it's matters of questions about dogma, whether it's matters of questions about anything else in Judaism? Is it a matter of simply wanting to not be religious because you want something that's outside of Judaism that you can't get within the Torah world? What's your experience? What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, this is a very, you touch on a very, very serious question. And I'm sure there's no one answer to this question. It would probably be very superficial to think that there's one answer to this question. I think we can talk about some trends in a very general way, some general trends or observations that I have seen, that I've heard from many others who are involved in this reality, or with these types of, with so many people who are on this path in one way or another. I think one component, and this is probably the profoundest component, it's also people mock this. They, often when I talk about it, they dismiss it as just, liberal, left-wing pop psychology. One issue is, and I don't mean it to use a cliche, but sometimes we use a cliche, and that is deep pain that exists in these young women or men as a result of so many different factors, from things as severe as sexual abuse to emotional abuse, for things that don't even look so severe, but they're very severe, for example, emotional neglect. From things like being for years in school and really feeling unsuccessful, really feeling like a failure. So it's not even something blatant or dramatic or anybody doing anything horrific, but sometimes if I for 10 years feel like a failure, my association with yeshiva, with school, with Gemara, with Torah, with Yiddishkeit, with God, causes me tremendous pain. There's a part in my brain, if we want to use neuroscientific terms, which I think are helpful today, we have amygdalas that God implanted in each of our brains to alert us to danger. If for 10 years or 5 years, I came to school every day and I was made to feel like a failure, not because my Rebbe, my teacher, my principal was not kind. They were kind. But because by the Bar Mitzvah, there were 4 boys who finished Mishnayos. There were another 10 boys who finished 1 Seder of Mishnayos. There were other 6 boys who finished 1 Masechta. And there was me, who couldn't even finish 2 Mishnahs for my Bar Mitzvah. Nobody did anything wrong. They're actually very nice to me. And I'm also good at baseball and football. But for 10 years, deep down, I know that I'm the lowest tier. I am a failure. Now when I'm 16, and I could make some choices, and I could get a job, and I have some different types of friends, and my parents can't really own my life. I'm just giving one classic example. For me, the school, the Beis Medrash, the God that put me into this system according to how I was raised, the Gemara, the Chumash, my father and mother, the whole religious zeitgeist and ambiance and environment, which put me in this place that has caused me pain for 10 years, my amygdala associates connection with this community with something very painful. It's like putting my hand, into an electrical outlet. It's painful. I start distancing myself. And maybe part of that distance means when I look at tefillin, even though the tefillin never hurt me, but the tefillin causes me pain. Now, much of this is not even conscious. It's not a calculated, developed philosophical, theological question. I read 100 books on this is a very, very primal place. Never mind if it wasn't just I felt like a failure. Never mind if there was real abuse. 1 in 4 or 5 children today, and these are conservative statistics, before hitting puberty, may have a sexual experience that can cause them, that when they develop, there will be challenges. There will be challenges in their development. When it comes to a religious life, which is so connected to Kedusha and Torah, purity and holiness, these kids may feel completely alienated. And then there could be another 100 or 1,000 stories. So I think, in one word, it's very often, if we were raised with a lack of attachment, with wounds, with trauma, could be shock trauma, could be developmental trauma, could be trauma that is known, could be trauma that is unknown, we will often distance ourselves from anything connected to the source of pain. We shut down, we disconnect. This is a form of safety. This is a coping mechanism. It's very hard for me today to find a young man or woman who has abandoned Judaism completely from an objective philosophical point of view. I just don't see it. I always, even if they say it's that, I always identify very profound emotional pain in their connection to Judaism. And this may have not been malicious or vicious. It may just be the people who raised them, or the environment where they were raised, simply didn't have the tools to be able to give them what they needed. And today, when we live in a generation where people feel that they have choices, right? If they leave their house, they will have where to sleep. They can make money in other places. We also live in a generation where people talk more about their emotions, where today relationships are celebrated in a way that people feel that they want to be emotionally connected to their value system, to their traditions, to their lifestyle. They're not just going to do things necessarily because their grandfather did it or their grandmother did it. In other words, we have this emotional openness, and I think in many ways it's one of the great things of this generation. We want deep emotional connection, just like in marriages. What many of our grandparents tolerated in marriages, many women today will not tolerate in a marriage, right? They want a marriage that is deep, that is fulfilling, that is meaningful, that is not painful, that is blissful, right? And the same is true in Yiddishkeit. We live in a generation where people feel, no, I want to feel good about my Judaism. And if I'm not only not feeling good, but I'm feeling very negative, I think this is one of the very, very prevalent causes for people abandoning Judaism, especially when the abandonment is radical and intense. It's not just, I put on a different type of yarmulke than my father, or I go to the mikveh in the morning and my father only goes to the mikveh before Yom Kippur, which is also a form of rebellion, because a father once complained to me about his son becoming, and I said, you know what? If God decreed that your son should rebel against you, be grateful.
I think that's a very important point you just made. I have a few questions to ask about that specific idea, this idea of pain being at the root of some people leaving religiosity. And I'll ask one of two questions. I'll start off with this one. Number one, how do we avoid doing that? Because you gave a very serious example where no one did anything consciously. In fact, everybody did everything, so to speak, right. Everyone was kind. We shouldn't play down the people who have talents and tell them, don't learn because you're going to make that guy feel bad because he can't. Don't be successful. That's obviously foolish. But on the other hand, if this is part of what makes Torah Judaism what it is, learning, success in learning, being someone who can do these things, we can't pretend that's not an essential part.
Yes.
And in fact, something which I think is a real problem, and I say this as somebody who cares deeply about learning, at least I try to, the fact that learning is so important, therefore it almost always turns out psychologically that, as we say in Israel, someone who can't learn would be sug bet. They are the second type of person, the secondary kind, the kind that's in the warehouse rather than out front. We always celebrate those people who are the best students because, let's say he also, as you said, he's good at football, he's good at baseball, and he can bowl or who knows what, but in yeshivas, we don't really care about that so much. That certainly isn't the kind of thing that's going to get you a better shidduch or anything else in that level. So what do we do about this? Is there a way of fixing that problem in our schools, in our society?
Yeah. I think our culture desperately needs again the spirit of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov, in many ways, came to the world and he taught that the hierarchy in Judaism, when it is applied to the very deep experience of our relationship with God, can be very, very corrupt. In other words, hierarchy is important in the sense that there's a Talmud Chacham, there's a Rav, there's a Paisik, there's a Dayan, and there is respect for that, and there should be respect for that. When the hierarchy is translated into you feeling that you don't have value, you're insignificant, right? God cares about him more than about you. When we lack that experience of what Moshe Rabbeinu says on his last days, Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Hashem Elokeichem. You are all part of this covenant. You are all an indispensable note in the divine symphony. Vayhi b'shur melech b'isasef rosh hayam yachad shiftei Yisrael. Rashi says God can only be a God when the Jewish people are one. Barcheinu avinu kolonu ke'echad. Not with lip service, but a real understanding that in the presence of infinity, the highest and the lowest are exactly the same. Hashava u'mash v'katan v'gadol. Bonim atem l'Hashem Elokeichem. For a healthy father or mother to say, this kid I like more because his IQ is higher. This kid, I don't care if something happens to them. That's not how parents talk. If we are children of Hashem, this very notion that because you have different skills or different powers, your soul is less valuable is a distortion of authentic Judaism. And I think we need healing. When learning Torah becomes a crutch and a tool of arrogance that exploits and manipulates a situation in which we respect intellectual genius rather than we have awe and reverence for Hashem, for truth, for authenticity, for kindness. The wisdom of Torah is a tool to connect. You know, everything can become, I hate to say this, everything can become a deity. Even Torah learning, if it's mistreated, can become a form of idol worship. I ask you, just because somebody was born with a better IQ, or somebody has Asperger's, and therefore they're antisocial, and they love sitting 24/7 with books, does that make them inherently superior and closer to God? That doesn't make sense. So I think we need to cultivate an approach where every student understands that despite the fact that if you could succeed in learning, awesome. And despite the fact that you connect to Hashem through learning 18 hours a day, gewaltig. It's the schus and the mitzvah and the connection is amazing. But that every student should know that their value is intrinsic and absolute and infinite. Now, does that mean practically we need an alternative, many different programs in every school? Probably. I know I send my son, I realized that I put him the first day in a regular yeshiva in first grade, and I saw that it was not good for him. Thank God. There was a great educator here in Muncie who created what's called an enrichment program with children who are in a different place, you know, whether it's social or intellectual, and it allows children to thrive. And I think we all need to embrace that with tremendous enthusiasm. The objective is that a teacher and a principal, I think, need to know, just like every parent, our main job as educators, or one of our main jobs as educators, is that every student should feel connection. Every student should walk into school, to yeshiva, and feel safe, emotionally and physically safe. This is a place of safety. This is a place where I am cherished. This is a place where there's people who want me to succeed, who want to bring out my potential, who want to see my light, who want to see me shine. That's a very deep, visceral feeling that every child and student will feel in their visceral system. I want to tell you a great story. I heard this in a video from the fellow himself. His name is Carver, and he's not Jewish. And he spoke about his time in school as a kid. And he said he had this drive to constantly drum on the table. And he annoyed the living daylights out of his teacher and out of his friends because he was always going like this. And the teacher expelled him and penalized him and sent him to the principal. And the principal said, you have to sit on both of your hands. Sit on both of your hands. So that helped for like 90 seconds. And then his hands came out and he continued. He said one day, it was a new year, he had a new teacher. His name was Mr. Johnson. And after a few days, Mr. Johnson says, I want you to stay after class. And he thought, okay, now he's just expelled for good. The teacher looks at him and says, I've heard that you have this problem. You keep on drumming all day. And I don't see it that way. I don't think that you have a problem. And he opened the drawer and he said, I have a little gift for you. And he gave him his first drumsticks and drum. And he says, you were created to be a drummer. And that's why your brain is telling your hands to do that. You don't have a problem. You're just a drummer. And this young man says, from that day, I did not let go of these drumsticks. And today, he's a world-renowned drummer, truly skilled. They bring him all over the world. And I think to myself, he had a teacher who didn't identify one model of perfection. Here was a kid who was disturbing the class. That's an objective fact. But instead of seeing him, as a problem case, which would have caused him to internalize that and see himself for the rest of his life as best, fine, but at worst, a real loser. Michelangelo was once asked about his sculptures, and he said, I have seen the angel trapped in the marble, and I chiseled away on the marble and set the angel free. Thank God he had a teacher who could see the angel trapped in the marble. Now, this is a lot of work because it's not about a system that is generic for every soul. But let's face it, how did God create the world? Everyone's DNA is unique. The Mishnah says in Sanhedrin, page 38, no two minds are the same, no two faces are the same, no two missions are the same. Every person needs to say, B'shvil li nivra ha'olam. So now I want to ask you, that 10-year-old kid who doesn't have the greatest kishroinus to be able to master Masechta after Masechta, when the Mishnah says every person is supposed to say the world was created for me, there's something at stake in God's universe that only I could complete. That's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin. It was said by Bezdin to the witnesses. Does that child feeling that? And if not, we have to ask ourselves, have I created a system out of Judaism? I think it was Churchill who said, we create institutions to facilitate our dreams, and then we become prisoners of those institutions. We need to have a vibrant relationship with a God who does not exist in a box.
Okay, that's very important. Let me ask you about the other side of it, though, because we're talking about how schools, institutions, synagogues, yeshivot can change now. And obviously, it's not as simple as some ideas. It's obviously implementing an entirely different way of understanding what education is supposed to be. That's too much for a single podcast today. But what do we do for those people who already went through that system, who already doubt their own self-worth, and therefore, as a result of that, either have become not religious or are thinking about becoming not religious? That pain already exists. So this is the second question I was going to ask about that. What do we do for those people for whom it's too late to reform the educational system?
So one of, I think, the most important things that we know today about trauma is the most powerful healing tool for trauma is connection and attachment. Because really all trauma is a form of disconnection. It's a form of isolation. I once saw the research of a great psychologist on addiction, and she said the antithesis of addiction is not sobriety. The antithesis of addiction is attachment. It's connection. When I'm connected to life, when I'm connected to people, when I'm connected to myself, I naturally will live a much healthier lifestyle. So I think when I go through pain because of abuse, because of sexual molestation, because of rape, because of being misunderstood, because of being bullied, because of emotional neglect, because nobody noticed me, I am going to become an isolated person. My alarms in my brain, in my amygdala, will start screaming and hollering when I am alerted to danger, and I have a coping mechanism in which I retreat, in which I protect myself, and in which I will disassociate, as I said before, from anything that causes me pain. And here is where the role of parents is so important. Nobody can do for children what Tati and Mami, what Abba and Ima can do. No therapist, no Rebbe, no Rosh Hashiva, no Mashpia, no Rebbe. They're great, and you may have the best therapist in the world. There's nobody who can heal a child like mother and father. How? Through attachment, attachment, attachment. Attachment heals. Attachment tells people that they're not isolated. Attachment creates safety. All healing happens in safety. Our brain, our nervous system can relax, can calm down when there is safety, when there's attachment. Let me go back to my first example. That boy who grew up in our system, for 10 years he felt like a failure. He's now 17 years old. He takes off his tzitzis. He takes off his tefillin. He's not interested in Shabbos because this is associated with pain. I want to be a success story. I want to feel good about myself. The whole Orthodox, frum, Torah culture makes me feel horrible about myself, right? He may even go as far, and this is very sad, to engrave a tattoo on himself. Why? What does the tattoo do? I don't have a craving for tattoos. What does the tattoo do? The tattoo is a statement. The tattoo is a statement that at the next simcha, his grandmother is going to see that he is completely disconnected from Judaism. His mother and father are getting the message, I am out. I checked out. Your system is something that I rejected unequivocally. I belong to a different world, to a different culture, to a different universe, to a different environment. That's the tattoo. Okay. Now Tati and Mami have a choice. And here's the choice. The choice is when Yankee or David, who now changed his name to Stephen, comes home Friday night, and he comes home in a car, of course, they have a choice. Mami could look at him, and this is very painful, and I'm going to try to say it without crying. Mami and Tati could look at him and say, our dear David, you can't come to our house this way. When you do tshuva, when you become a Jew, then you're welcome. Until then, find yourself another family, find yourself another house. This is their way of dealing with pain. Horrible, horrible pain. They had Mesiras Nefesh for this boy. And he rejected all of their values, including showing up with a car on Shabbos. And you know what? I will be the last person to judge them because I understand the pain very, very well. I understand it. They throw him out of the house, they sever the connection, and they really feel they're doing the right thing. But it's based on an erroneous assumption. The erroneous assumption is that he has chosen to rebel against Shabbos. It's not true. He's not. He's a traumatized boy who deep down doesn't even know how much pain he's carrying. And this is his way of creating safety for himself. If parents reject him, now what happens is he knows for my safety, I need to stay away from my father, away from my mother, and away from their system. What if father and mother do something superhuman and divine? They look at him and they say, you're my child forever. This is your house. We always want you here. We love you unconditionally. And absolutely nothing will come in the way of our relationship to you. You know what starts happening? In his brain, he's now confused. Wait, Tati sent me to this yeshiva, which destroyed my self-esteem. So Tati is my enemy, but he's not my enemy. Mommy put me through the system that destroyed me, but Mommy loves me. Wow. Slowly, these two people who are the source of the trauma, because they put him through the firm system, are doing the exact opposite. They are cultivating the deepest attachment. And the more he defies them, and I've seen parents do this, the more he defies them, they look at him in the eyes and they say, we love you. They understand where the defiance is coming from. They will not let go of that relationship, of that attachment. Now, they have to be worked out psychologically, internally. If they don't deal with their own insecurities and their own shame and their own guilt, they will never be able to do this. But when they can do this, and can do this consistently, he will one day be able to look at his own pain and see that running away or putting a tattoo does not take away your pain and does not give you back your self-esteem. You really need to find your soul. You need to really find your God. And then one day he'll be able to be healthier. And once you're a healthier person, Judaism, which is God's blueprint for life, is organic. It's holistic. Judaism is not some strange culture that we superimpose on our kids because we want to feel good about ourselves. Real Yiddishkeit, at least the way I understand it, is God's blueprint for the best way to live. Physically, emotionally, socially, spiritually. That's what it is. When I'm healthy, I want to live a good life. I want to be productive. I want to have meaning in my life. I want to be aligned. I want to celebrate life. I want to dance to the end of love. I want to have good relationships. So with attachment comes healing. With healing, the person is capable of making choices that are beneficial, that are meaningful, that are productive.
Rabbi Jacobson, I want to move away from pain because what you're saying makes a lot of sense. At the same time, I also think that there are certainly some people, maybe you'll say this is incorrect, but it seems to me there's certainly some people who go off the derech, again, using that term, who become less religious or non-religious. It doesn't seem, at least to me, that they all come from a place of pain. Sometimes it's because of their social circles. Sometimes it's from other things. You said you haven't seen it come from specific questions about dogma, maybe so, but I don't, to me, it doesn't necessarily ring as fully all-encompassing to say it's always a result of trauma. I would guess that there are people, and there are plenty of wonderful families and wonderful kids, and the kids simply, they choose not to be religious. And although I don't know what happened in school, I don't know what happens behind closed doors, I don't think it's always because of pain. That doesn't necessarily ring, it sounds a little bit too simple to me. Can we talk about some of the other reasons maybe that it might happen? Because people who are not in pain, simply for example, here in Israel, they might go to the army, they might get involved in the social circle of not religious people, and that becomes their new influence. They become not religious. It has nothing to do with trauma experience. It's just that that's something that attracts them more.
Yeah. So this is, I think, another factor. Sometimes a child grows up in an environment, even if there was no, like you say, major trauma, major pain, but the lifestyle of their parents may feel like a lifestyle that comes with pressure, with dogma. It's a burden. It's certainly not what I want. It's not what I could celebrate. I feel that it's restrictive. It's uptight. And I go and I see a world and I just want to, what they say, I want to chill. I want to have an easier life. I want to get rid of all these burdens. I'll give an example of Pesach. There's a lot of homes where there's a lot of stringencies on Pesach. And many young people told me, we like Pesach, but we don't want our parents' Pesach. Our parents' Pesach comes with a lot of seriousness and a lot of tension. So they let go of all these stringencies on Pesach. So that's one category that is pretty prevalent, where people are not abandoning the religion or even angry at the religion, but they do feel that there's a lot of intensity and anxiety that they don't want, they don't need, and therefore they go away from it. They may change their garments. Yeah. Over there, too, it's not trauma with a big T. But it's the fact that a lot of their Judaism that they experienced had a lot of anxiety to it, a lot of intensity to it, and they really want to liberate themselves from that. So I think that's one other element. And I think that teaches us all that our relationship with Judaism must be based on a regulated nervous system and must come from very, very deep connection. My Shabbos table, my Yom Tov table, my davening, my learning, the premise of it all ought to be celebration of life. That will infuse my children with a different attitude, with a different perspective. If they feel, however, that my Shabbos, my Yom Tov, my Tefillin, my Mezuzah, my Tzitzis, my Kashrus, my Chumras, my Hidurim. I once said to a group before Pesach, I said, it says in Rishonim, Tosfos says in Menachos, Minig Yisrael Toirahu. It also says, I think it's brought in Shibbolei Halakha, Minig is Oisius Gehenim. Which one is it? Is Minig Torah or Minig is Gehenim? So I said it's simple. If the minig is done with passion, with love, geschmack, then it's Torah. If the minig is a source of contention and anxiety and negativity and negative energy, minig is Gehenim. Who wants to be in Gehenim? The kids run away from that Gehenim. I think that's one aspect. Another aspect has to do with what you spoke about, army or friends or environment. And that is when a child did not, when a tree doesn't develop roots the way it needs to develop, a tsunami, a storm comes and sweeps it off its feet and sends it flying, and it goes into a different environment and maybe develops new roots. Those who live in a very culturally isolated community, they may not have that exposure. So even if they don't have deep roots and they're not anchored deeply, but they go with the flow, they go with the system because they don't know anything else, right? And you have these communities today. But a kid who grew up in a certain community and the roots did not develop, he didn't develop a real, or she did not develop a real appreciation for what they're doing. They're not anchored. The opposite of the word kedusha is chayil. Chayil doesn't mean mundane. Chayil means sand. Why is that sand? Because the sand, gone with the wind. We don't plant. It's a rootless place. The opposite of kedusha is I have no roots. So this is not really what we daven in davening. We say in Musa, Visita enu bigvulenu. You should plant us in our borders. Visita enu. In Yiddish, it's called eingepflanzt. Hazoirim, lizroa, right, to plant. So if I don't have those strong roots, and now I'm 18 years old, I go to the army, or I go somewhere else, and I see a different culture, and the same responsibilities are not here, and it looks like, at least superficially, we're having a great time, and the fact that we can do whatever we want, I mean, in the army you can do whatever you want, but the fact that a lot of the limitations that I had in my youth are gone, and it seems much more exciting and much more open to all the opportunities of God's world. And I don't have anything really serious to counterbalance that. What do I have? I have my mother's tehillim, and I have my grandmother's sighing that I, compromised the path. But I don't have my own roots. So then there's so much temptation. There's so much temptation out there. There's so many things alluring me. And I think here the lesson for all of us is, what are the roots your children are getting? It's not enough for you to have roots. Is this tree going to have roots? In other words, is Yiddishkeit something that has permeated their psyche? Because when they're going to be exposed to that influence, now very often we raise our kids and we expect them to go with the flow. But if they haven't cultivated their own relationship, when they will come into a different environment where there will be a lot of other forces, that will be a very powerful trap.
So do you think in that case, if somebody does have proper roots, now I'm getting into a big issue here in Israel, frankly, and I don't expect you to explain how you feel about the army. I don't mean that. But in terms of a person's leaving Judaism because, or leaving Torah observance, I should say, in terms of a person leaving Torah observance because of those external influences, if a person has roots, is there any reason to be afraid? In other words, should a parent say, my kid has strong roots and therefore I have no problem with his going to the army. Therefore, I have no problem with his going to a secular college, for example, assuming that is where he's supposed to be in terms of what he wants to study? Or does one say, it's still not worth the chance because even with roots, you never know what can happen?
It's a great question. In the morning, we daven every day and we say, Al tevienu lidei nisayon, right? Al tevienu lidei nisayon v'lei lidei bizayon. I think it's important to know that one day our kids, wherever they grow up, are going to see a lot of things in the world. They're going to, they don't always remain 9 years old. They become 16 and then 26 and 36. And they're going to see things. And that's why roots are so important. Because I'm not going to be able to stand over my son and say, did you hear Kriyas HaTorah? Did you wake up for Kriyas Shema? It's already Lichtzunden. Did you take a shower? It's almost Shabbos. Did you make a bracha? Right? There's a certain point where I'm not going to be able to do that anymore. And if I do
the owner tonight,
right? Sfiras very good. And right. And what's it? Torah? You have a parsha sheets. Take your parsha. So it's all really about, like I used to hear from the Rebbe used to say a lot. I grew up by the Rebbe. He said, Rashi says, I can't hold the match there forever. I hold the match, but the point is that the flame should start burning on its own. The wick owns its flame. It's not anymore Tati's flame, Mommy's flame. That is critical and vital. And I think those are the major lessons from what we see, because if not, even if my kid decides to stay in the system, sometimes it's very superficial. Remember, there's a huge percentage. I'm just mentioning this in parentheses, but maybe it's not in parentheses. I met yesterday with somebody who is in the New York area, the Brooklyn area. He's one of the top leading therapists dealing with the Hasidic community. And he told me a staggering number. He told me that there are 30%, he believes, of the community, the Hasidic community, they dress in the Hasidic garb, they go to synagogue on Shabbos, they lead a Torah Orthodox lifestyle. They send their kids through the ultra-Orthodox system, but they checked out emotionally. They checked out emotionally. Maybe they're atheists. Maybe they don't daven. Maybe they don't put on tefillin. Emotionally checked out. They do it because it's more convenient, and maybe they love their wife and kids, and this makes much more sense. But this is fascinating. So you can have you're talking about these kids who leave here. You're talking about people, they're wearing streimlach on Shabbos. They're wearing a long bekasha. I'm talking about the Hasidic community, the same existent Litvish, Yeshivish, modern Orthodox. I don't mean here to talk about one demographic. I think everyone shares these challenges. But this was fascinating. So this is a whole other phenomenon where I'm in the system, I'm doing everything, but I'm really not there. So I think Al Tevienu L'Dei Nisayon means we are all vulnerable. We are all vulnerable. Ein apotropos laharayos. Just like when it comes to relationships. You know, the halacha is so strict about men and women and relationships. Why? Because, you know, when we heard the Chaim Valder story, we realized, you know, the depth of corruption that the human soul is capable of is very, very powerful. And therefore, we always have to be cautious. We always have to be careful. We always have to protect ourselves and protect our children. But I think, and that's why I think, you know, when we understand that, it's much more, we are healthier and we're more sober. But I think we have to understand that this should not be done with negativity coming out of fear. It's coming from a place of empowerment. You know, sometimes Judaism is presented as such an insecure system that if, God forbid, you're going to see something, you're going to lose it all. You know, as Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says in the Gemara Menachos Samachay, he told the Sedusi, "Loi tehei Torah shlema shalano kesicha b'teila shalahem." If Torah is real, we don't have to hide it in a box and hide everybody in a box. It has the power to confront secular culture. But when we sometimes forget that humans are weak, we're vulnerable. And the Yetzer Hara, if it has an opportunity to abandon responsibility and abandon duty, it might celebrate that. So I think we always have to be cautious despite the roots, all of us. Even I'm talking about myself. I'm 51 years old, right? But I know if I allow myself to go down a certain path and go into a certain situation, right? Let's say flirt with somebody I shouldn't be flirting with, the results of that can be catastrophic. And I'm talking about myself. I'm married, Baruch Hashem. I have children. I'm not 20 years old anymore. So is this not true about an 18-year-old? Is this not true about a 19-year-old? Even if he or she has developed good roots, not out of fear, not out of insecurity, but out of a deep, mature understanding of the human condition and what it means to cultivate a life of Kedusha. To cultivate a life of Kedusha means to cultivate a life of constant alignment and awareness. That takes discipline, it takes work, it takes effort, and it takes a deliberate state of mind where I want to live with consciousness and I want to live with spiritual ecstasy. That takes effort.
So I want to get back to what you said about emotionally checked out religious Jews. We'll get there in a minute. But before we do, only because you mentioned a few examples of sexual impropriety, you mentioned the phrase "in apotropos laharayos," which means that no one can guard you against sexual temptation. You got to be, there's no guarantee, I should say, for that sort of thing.
Even the holiest rabbi can be put the bodyguard because he also has a temptation.
Right. So my wonderful friend, Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, whom I know you're very close to as well, the author of a book called Halachic Positions, he talks to me about this. His contention is this, and I'm curious what you think about this, that sometimes one of the messages that people get in the Orthodox community about sexuality is that effectively, if you have to ask, the answer is it's forbidden. And obviously that's not really true. They think, and he was telling me this in his experience in talking to people often believe that once you reach a Torah marriage, that's when all, quote unquote, the fun stops because things are no longer allowed. And obviously people get a lot of things wrong. Is it true, in your opinion, Rabbi Jacobson, that incorrect messages about the Torah approach to sexuality can contribute to people leaving observance?
Wow, that's a profound that's a serious question. I would just phrase it a little differently. I would say that often erroneous messages communicated to young men and women already from bar mitzvah age and earlier, all the way through the wedding and after the wedding, by themselves, by the YouTube videos they watch, by Kala teachers, by chassan teachers, by rebbes, rabbis, fathers, and mothers, who often, consciously or unconsciously, deliberately, non-deliberately, communicate erroneous messages and approaches to sexuality, can sow a lot of doubt, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, and create a lot of challenges in the poor psyches of these young men and women, both before their wedding and after their wedding. I myself have heard from many, many young men and women, some of them are not young anymore, whose life in the bedroom has become so challenging because nobody shared with them some information and guidance that would help them, and also understand what people need. And not every chumrah, not every stringency that may be practiced by spiritually elevated people should be applied to every couple. Because let's face it, and this is essential to Torah, a healthy, intimate life between a husband and a wife is a major component of creating a happy marriage. When a husband can experience the joy of being with his wife, and a woman can experience the joy of being with her husband, according to Halach and Shulchan Aruch, not only does that not undermine Torah, but this is a divine gift. The Ramban calls this, in his letter, the Kodesh HaKadoshim of Jewish life. In Tanakh, the Kodesh HaKadoshim is called Chadar HaMitos, the bedroom. the symbol on top of the Aron was the male and female keruvim gazing at each other with love and affection, right? And the Gemara says in Yuma Daf Nandala that when the Gentiles went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, they took out the keruvim and they said, look at this nation. Look what they do in their Holy of Holies. This is what they're thinking about. For them, this was depravity because in their mind, sexuality and God, like in Christianity, are so remote. For Judaism, intimacy between man and woman, when it's done in a morally and holy way, it's a reflection of our love to God. The whole Shir Hashirim is very sensual and very graphic, and it's all a metaphor. So the point is that not only does Judaism not want to crush this element, on the contrary, Halacha, I think, wants to cultivate the deepest form of joy. There's a Gemara in Brachas. I don't know. It's so interesting. The Gemara is, and I don't have any mystical insight into it, but it's a fascinating Gemara. Reb Kahana hid under the bed of Rav, and he saw how excited Rav was excited during his relationship, and he came out of the bed, and Rav said, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Torah hi v'lilmad ani tzarich." Nobody wanted to talk about this. I had to learn. Now, what is the Gemara trying to teach us? Rav was considered the greatest Jew of the generation. And the Gemara is teaching us that the Rav experienced joy, and he gave that joy to his wife. What does this tell us? I would say it's the opposite. The more somebody cultivates a real spiritual connection with their soul and God, the more joy there is in their marriage, including in their intimacy. Because real intimacy is intimacy. Real intimacy is not about a move or another move. Real intimacy is about safety. It's about vulnerability. The Gemara says in Ksuvas, Hu bevigdei v'hi bevigdei yoytze v'yitin ksuva. If he stays in his garment, she stays in her garment. That's not intimacy. So the Balatanya says this is a metaphor for life. If my relationship to God is with blockages, if I remain in my clothes and you remain in your clothes, there's no relationship. Intimacy is all about vulnerability. It's all about authenticity. It's all about the ability to be able to transcend my ego and my blockages and really celebrate oneness and vulnerability. There's nothing like a real alignment with Hashem and with my soul that allows me to have that relationship. So I think that the whole halachic system really was intended to be able not just to create healthy boundaries of morality, of course, but also to be able to create an environment that the relationship can be far deeper, far more authentic, far more vulnerable, and therefore far more timeless.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. I think that's a very important way of looking at this. And I'd like to go back to what we talked about a few moments ago about that idea of people being emotionally checked out, people who are religious externally, but either they don't really believe it, or alternatively, they're not really keeping mitzvot. And that leads to an interesting, I don't want to call it a phenomenon because I don't know how common it is, but I know it does exist. There are some people who leave observance. I'm using that word deliberately. They become less observant or non-observant, but their belief in God remains strong. Then you have other people who are very observant, but they don't believe any of it. It's just something that they do culturally or because it's their habit. It's habitual observance. Now, the Gemara does say that, quotes God as saying, if only they'd left me and kept my Torah, which seems to imply that observance takes precedence. On the other hand, I've heard people say that they're no longer observant, but they're much happier, they feel more fulfilled, and they have a better relationship with God. Now, that may very well be because of issues like the trauma that you mentioned, or maybe other issues that might come up. But my question for you, Rabbi Jacobson, is this. If I see somebody like that, is that a person that I should say, you know what, you're happy, you're enjoying your relationship with God, I'm not going to get involved? I'm not a kiruv professional, so it doesn't really apply to me, but in the sense that we all are teachers in some level, are we right to think of that person as that person's fulfilled, they have a relationship with God, and that's good enough? Or do you think there's room to say, no, that person really should come back to mitzvah observance, even though that made them less happy? It made them less connected to God in their own minds.
Beautiful question. Very beautiful question. I would make two very important points here. One has to do with judgmentalism and egotism, and one has to do with understanding really what Torah and mitzvahs are, okay? Whenever we want to connect to people of any demographic and any level, including people that have left Judaism because of social pressure or social temptations, people who have left Judaism because, or certain aspects of Judaism because of the dogma and the heaviness and the burden and the sense of anxiety, or people who have left because of trauma, or people that we just meet who maybe grew up secular. I think when we get rid of our own judgmentalism, which comes from our own ego, we could connect to people in a very deep way wherever they are. They once asked the Baal HaTanya, which is a greater mitzvah, to love God or to love another Jew? And they expected this great rabbi to say, well, there's priorities, love of God comes first. And he said, love of another Jew is a commentary on the love of God. How do you know you love God? How do I know you love me? When you love my children. If you tell me, Rabbi Jacobson, I love you. I hate your wife. I hate your kids. Do me a favor. Get out of my life. Somebody is in shul. V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, nagdishoch, nekadesh, kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. Then I go out in the street and I meet a Jew who I don't agree with. You're a sick man. I hate your guts. God says, do me a favor. Don't tell me that you love me when you hate my children. So I think the premise of all of our connection and relationships and conversations, we must rid our hearts from judgmentalism and egotism. When I talk to somebody, it should always be based on real connection, on real love. And that happens only when I'm not insecure in my own Yiddishkeit. If I'm insecure in my own Yiddishkeit, you or whoever, you're going to trigger me. And I need to put you down for me to feel good. But then it means I'm not connected to God. I'm connected to my ego. I'm connected to my culture. I'm connected to my own version of God. And then maybe I need to be like Avram Avinu and smash some idols, even if they're called religious idols. I think that's the premise. When we connect to people, if I right away feel judgmental, oh, you're such a horrible person, you're such a horrible Jew, let me show you the right path so I could set you straight and fix you, I don't think I'm going to be effective. I won't think I'm going to be effective. And second of all, I think it means that I am in a very, very lowly moral state. As it says in Pirkei Avos, don't judge other people until you do not live in their shoes. You're not living in their space. The Sfas Emes adds 3 words. Al says, and you will never be in his space. You don't have my soul. You don't have my temptations. You don't have my personality. You don't have my DNA. That's number one. It says in Tanya, it says in Pirkei Avos, be humble before every person. Tanya says, how? What if I'm in a much better space spiritually? And he says, figure out all the temptations and struggles the other person has, and then find out, ask yourself, if you would have had all those struggles, or you would have had that lifestyle, or you would have had those temptations, where would you be today? So we should always be humble and respectful. That's number one. Number two, I think this is a very important point, is how we view Torah and mitzvahs. If I view Torah and mitzvahs as simply a cultural, nice tradition that we Jews have done over thousands of years, and now another person says, I am much happier without these mitzvahs. I believe in God. I talk to God my own way. I don't need to eat matzah on Pesach. I don't need to hear shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Shachris doesn't mean anything to me. Tefillin brings me back horrible memories from my yeshiva days and from being forced to have a bar mitzvah, which I hated every moment of it, and saying brachas before I eat. I meditate, I breathe, I do other beautiful stuff. I think we should always genuinely celebrate the relationship that a person has. Always. Wow, you feel connected to Hashem. That's amazing. You know what? I want to learn from you. I sometimes daven shachris and I don't feel connected. Teach me what a connection is like. I want to learn from you. And genuinely, I am happy that you are happy. I am happy that you are happy. But then there's something else. When I realize that Torah and mitzvahs are a blueprint that the Creator gave to humanity in the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and to the Jewish people in the Taryag Mitzvahs of Torah, a blueprint to be able to achieve their deepest spiritual connection and bliss. So then, it's just like if I have an incredible therapist, or an incredible trainer, life trainer, or an incredible coach, or an incredible rabbi, or an incredible teacher, and I'm going to come to you, or I have you're making 2% on your money in your bank, and I have an investment which is producing 17% a year. I'm going to come to you as a very good friend of mine and say, Scott, you know what? You could put money here, and I'm telling you, for the last 10 years, I've been making 17% a year rather than your 2% or 1% or 0.5% in your bank. Not because I disrespect where you have your money now, but I really feel there is a very powerful opportunity for you. So as a Jew, believing deep down that Torah and mitzvahs is a divine blueprint for the Jewish soul, for the Jewish life, I can respect that there may be trauma. I can respect that maybe, I want to tell you something that I heard, and it changed my perspective. I once gave a lecture on Shabbos, about Shabbos. I thought it was a beautiful lecture, what Shabbos is. A young man came over to me. I will never forget this. He had a tear coming down his cheek. He said, Rabbi, why, Rabbi Jacobson? One day, maybe I'll keep Shabbos again because your words were beautiful. So I said to him, maybe a little aggressively, why one day? Why not this Shabbos if it was so beautiful? He says, no. One day I hope I'll be able to internalize your words and keep Shabbos. I said, why was it so hard to internalize my words? This boy taught me a lesson I will never forget. He said to me, I still feel the palpitations. He said to me, Friday night was the only night that our shul was empty. Because after davening, Shabbos, everybody goes home. Even the steigers, they go home. You have your meal. Everybody goes home. The rabbi, the gabbai, the shamish, the daf yomi, magid shir, everyone is home Friday night. So he says that was the one night a year when the perpetrator knew that there was nobody in shul. And for 3 years, I was molested in shul on Friday night for 3 years, and he was never caught. So he says, for me, Shabbos means the night of sexual abuse. The beauty of Shabbos, the home, the family, the zmiras, the gefilte fish, the environment, the chicken soup, the relaxation, the serenity. No. For me, the serenity of Shabbos caused me to be abused for 3 years as a little kid. So he says, I can't keep Shabbos now. I'm hoping that one day I'll be able to keep the Shabbos you're talking about. This, I'm not saying that everyone who abandons Shabbos has this story, but it was such a lesson for me. Now, for me to come to him and say, you're a bad Jew. Why don't you keep Shabbos? What a egomaniac I am. How clueless, how self-centered, how heartless, how mindless. But if I care about this kid, I want to be there for him. I want to help him heal. I want to be part of his hope. I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I believe when he will heal enough, he will be able to reclaim Shabbos. He will be able to reclaim the meaning of Sheishes Yom Oisi Beini Ubeinechem. Like we say, we say V'shamru V'nei Yisrael Beini Ubeinechem Oisi La'olam. This is my day when I want to share intimacy with you. But how can he experience that today when for him Shabbos meant emotional murder, when for him Shabbos meant he is a shmata, he is valueless, he has no value. So I think when we understand mitzvahs for what they really are, with tremendous TLC, we have a schus and a privilege to help people heal and find out what about the mitzvah is so triggering for them and how they can re-embrace it.
Okay, Rabbi Jacobson, we have very little time left, and your words are very inspiring. I want to conclude by asking you a question on a practical level. There's obviously a lot more we could talk about, but at least on a practical level, for people who have family members, let's say parents who have children who are no longer religious, and the parents are struggling with that, feeling rejected personally. You already said, I think beautifully, that they have to show them how much they're willing to accept them. That's a very emotionally difficult thing to do. I don't mean practically. I'm not even speaking practically. I'm talking about on an emotional level.
Yeah.
What would you advise to parents who feel that their child hasn't rejected Torah? They've rejected them. They've rejected their values. They've rejected everything that they brought them up with. How do you suggest the parents relate to that child on their own? How do they think about them in such a way that they don't feel that rejection, which will obviously hurt them personally and will inevitably also affect negatively their relationship with their child?
Yeah, well, it's such an important question. The first thing is I want to validate the pain. The pain is very serious. The pain is very deep. Mothers and fathers in these situations need to allow themselves to cry and to grieve. You have to grieve. It's a very serious form of loss. Just like, God forbid, when we lose someone in our life, when you invested your entire being in raising this child and you were hoping for a certain type of future, you saw a trajectory heading a certain way and you lost your dream. Your dream was shattered. This beautiful girl and this beautiful boy, when they were 12 years old, the kindest, most delicious, most angelic child. By the way, and I know I don't want to open up a whole new highway here, a whole new journey, but I want to tell you, so many times when I have spoken to parents whose children left Yiddishkeit, I very often ask them a question. I said, honestly, this boy and girl who abandoned Yiddishkeit, tell me the truth, when they were little, were they your most selfish, harsh, crude, self-centered, careless type of child, insensitive, apathetic, indifferent, completely not getting anything spiritual or intellectual, or maybe the other way? And I would say 99.9% of the time, mothers and fathers told me it's the child who was the most sensitive, who was the most spiritual, who was the most kind, who was the most giving. It's that boy, 7 years old, Friday night, when he saw his mother is exhausted after the meal and everybody went to sleep. He said, Mommy, can I help you clean the dishes? That's the boy. So I say to these parents, now you think when he's 18 years old, the neshama of Hitler went into him suddenly and he became part of the SS? I don't think that happened. So the first thing is there's grief, there's pain, there's a dream that was shattered. And that's why, number one, you have to make sure your marriage is fortified. Fathers and mothers with struggling children need each other more than ever. Make sure your marriage is not suffering because you have each other. You will understand the pain like nobody else. Make sure you are connected much deeper than ever. Don't allow this to destroy your marriage because then you are destroying, number one, yourselves, and number two, the lifeboat that can help your child come back. Number one. Number two, you need a support system. We need support systems. That's why today, I go every few months. There's a convention here in America called Kesher Nafshi. 1,500 people. You're talking about 600-700 couples who come, and this is Satme and Vizhnitz and Bobiv and Chabad and Kloiserberg and Sons and Litvish and Yeshivish and Modern Orthodox and Very Orthodox and right wing and left wing and Tolders, all types, and they have one common denominator. They are in pain because their children are struggling with Yiddishkeit, and they come together for it's incredible, vulnerable weekends. But everybody, you need support systems. Number 2. Number 3, don't get advice from people who don't have a lot of experience with this. There are rabbis who mean well, but they don't have experience. They will give you the wrong advice, not because they want to, but because they don't know. I don't go to a dentist for cardiology issues. For my teeth, I don't go to a neurosurgeon, not because I don't respect neurosurgeons, but because you got to go to a dentist for a dentist. You need to get advice from people who are experienced. The next issue is when you look at your child, and this is hard, it comes down, it's going to sound a little strange, to your own relationship with God. These children are doing us a very deep service. They are helping us develop a Judaism that is much more authentic. Very often our Judaism is very cultural. It's very ego-based. It's like we raise these kids, they give us nachas, we hatch them, match them, dispatch them, and wait for the invitation to the Shalom Zacher and to the bris. We want the nachas, and it's beautiful, and I hope everyone has endless nachas. These kids challenge us at our core. And you know what they help us do? They help us develop a real relationship with Hashem. They help us reach a place where we ask not what our children can do for us, but what we can do for our children. We ask not what God can do for us, but what we can do for God. We ask not how we will feel better about our behavior. We really ask, what is our mission as parents? How can we help them fulfill their mission and facilitate their journey? We stop taking things personally. We take our ego out of the equation. We start serving God. We look into the eyes of the children and we see the innocence that we saw when they were 1 year old. You're a boy or girl who now has left Yiddishkeit. When they were 1, 2, 3, when you looked at them, what did you see? You saw a chelik Eloka mimal mamish. You saw a piece of divinity. You could see it even when they're 20 and 30 and 17 and 35. Look at it. Look at the divinity. Look at the godliness. Look at the beauty. Don't take things personal. Every soul has a different journey. I really believe with all my heart, there are the best parents in the world who have children who have left Yiddishkeit. I know parents who are sick. They're sick people. All their kids are from. All their kids are from. I know a father, he is as abusive as it gets. All his kids are from. I know another father, he's a malach Elokim. 4 of his children are struggling. There is no logical equation. You're a good father or a good mother and it all works out. Sometimes, yeah. There's no question that many abusive parents, their kids run away. No question. But it's not clear mathematics. It's really not. Trust me, I know this sugya very well. I see it everywhere. My point is, every neshama has a journey. And it's not about my fault, your fault. It's not a blame game. It's mi yodayim leis kazei sigat lamalchus. My job as a father and mother is not to get the nachas that I would have loved to have so I could feel good about myself. There's a much deeper job. My job as a father and mother is to serve Hashem and find out what I can do to help this beautiful neshama in her and his journey with real humility, with real vulnerability, with real love, coupled with all the pain and disappointment. This is inner work that is very deep. Nobody would know about this. This is not conspicuous. We don't write about this in the magazines and the websites. This is your own inner work of opening your heart, being aware of your own pain and disappointment, so then you can choose a path of connection and love.
Rabbi Jacobson, that was very beautiful, very moving, and I think rings extraordinarily true. I'll just say 2 things that made me think of. One of them is, I mentioned before, Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, my friend. He and I have often talked about the fact that Chizkiyahu HaMelech, one of the greatest kings of all time, someone who almost was Mashiach, as I'll say.
Exactly. Mashiach.
His son was Menashe, who was the symbol of an evil king.
Exactly.
And it, maybe even going further, perhaps this is a questionable assumption, but Mashiach comes through Menashe. Mashiach has to come through that evil person. We don't know Hashem's plans, why Hashem does things in certain ways. I don't mean that Hashem made someone bad, but obviously the fact that Mashiach eventually has to come out of somebody who was both a righteous person like Chizkiyahu and his son, the wicked Menashe, perhaps people have long journeys, and perhaps there are other things, other calculations.
There's
that God
a beautiful,
has
beautiful commentary of Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin on this. Why Mashiach comes from Menashe. In Pri Tzadok, Parshas Boy, and Pri Tzadok, Parshas Vayikra, in a section on the 4 sons on Pesach. Incredible commentary he has over there. And that is his point. That is his point, that even Menashe, who is certainly seen as the most heinous and evil king, even Menashe, at his core, was a chelek elokam imal, even though he took it in the wrong direction. And therefore, at the end, he says he's going to have a tikkun. The Mishnah says in Sanhedrin, 11th chapter, that there are Jews who don't have a chelek lo'olam haba. And then the Gemara says later, Derech Rishumos Amru, they do have a chelek in olam haba. So he says, what? These Derech Rishumos have an argument with the Mishnah? And he says, Derech Rishumos means people who can expound and see the roshim, the imprint of divinity in a soul, even when nobody else sees it. And they found that spark. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin that when Menashe did tshuva after a lot of suffering and after a lot of crimes, the Malachim told Hashem, we're not accepting him back. He's done. You know, even in heaven, there's Gaboyim who don't give everybody access. So what did Hashem do? He dug a tunnel. Chotar chatira tachas kisei hakavod. He dug a tunnel so Menashe could come back. So the Maharal says, what's this crazy story? What, God doesn't have control over heaven? He's making tunnels? I know making tunnels today doesn't, bring up sweet ideas, but God is making tunnels to avoid the Malachim so Menashe could come close? And of course, the answer is that sometimes we have to dig tunnels into our subconscious. Go underneath everything, under the pain, under the blockages, under the grief. There's a path for every soul.
That's beautiful. And the other point I want to make, which you said reminds me of something that Rabbi Israel said when I spoke to him about people who are what they call datlash, datile sha'avar, no longer religious. He said the thing to remember is that, using this example, these children, as you said, sometimes they're the sweetest kids. These are really wonderful children. These are not Menashe HaMelech. These are wonderful kids who may have left Torah Judaism in the sense of Ben Adam Lamakom, the mitzvot between Hashem and human beings. But in other realms, in terms of their helping their mother with the dishes, as you said, in terms of their sweetness and their kindness, let's not pretend that's not also part of Torah Judaism. The fact that they are no longer putting on tefillin is tragic. But the fact that they're helping with the dishes, maybe the kid who's putting on tefillin isn't helping with the dishes. So who's to say who's more religious in that sense? There's a lot we have to think about in terms of maybe broadening our understanding of who's in the tent and who's not.
It's so true. And I would maybe say something even more dramatic, and some people won't like what I'm going to say. And that is understanding that a Jew should keep Torah and mitzvahs, and we should do whatever we can to influence a Jew to keep Torah and mitzvahs. Sometimes these children or these youngsters are helping us make a cheshbon hanefesh. Maybe he left Ben Adam Lamakayim because he grew up in an environment where he saw hypocrisy at its worst. Maybe he saw that Ben Adam Lamakayim, in his experience, was a sham. It was like, if you have the right amount of money, if you have the protectia, then you're the holiest guy in the community. If not, you're garbage. Maybe he grew up in a community, and some of you will know what I'm talking about, where in the name of Hasidism or faith or tzaddikim, you're allowed to persecute, you're allowed to curse, you're allowed to say Yemach Shemai on Jews, you're allowed to throw rocks on Shabbos, you're allowed to stop talking to children, fathers, mothers, brothers, because they daven in a different shul. Maybe you grew up in a community where a Rebbe talks about Avos Yisrael, but he won't talk to his own brother because that person has a different way. Maybe you grew up in a yeshiva community where the lack of decency and humanness in the name of God is horrendous and repulsive. And he says, if this is what tefillin represents, you put on tefillin every day. I see people who are secular who are much nicer. So you want me to hold on to a tradition which, in that's the name in which you justify this type of insane behavior? A soldier who's sacrificing his life for you comes in from Mincha Ma'ariv, and you throw orange juice in it? And that's called worshiping God? So let's understand, sometimes it's the very Bein Adam La'Makom that they experienced that says, if this is your God, I don't want to have a part in this. I don't want to have a part in this Judaism. This is an invitation to us to ask ourselves, maybe we have gone wrong. Maybe we have gone wrong. I know a lot of people who are secular today. They're the kindest people in the world because they were abused by a rabbi with a long beard. When they see a beard, it represents abuse. Am I saying that every Jew should take off their beard? Chas v'shalom. I'm not going to say that. There's a pasuk, lo yisashchis pa'askoncha. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying we have to make a cheshbon hanefesh. You know, there's a fellow I know. He's from Lakewood. His name is Rabbi Tress. His father was Mike Tress. You ever heard of Mike Tress?
Yeah.
He was a big Aguda Asken Vadat Salah. Mike Tress didn't have a beard. He lived in Williamsburg on Rodney Street. In the 50s, he would meet the Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Eilish Teitelbaum, and they would talk for a long time. Once they spoke for a half an hour on the street. So a Satmar Chassid tells the Satmar Rebbe, he says, I don't understand. Mike Tress, on a board, doesn't have a beard. You know, Chassidim, a beard is everything. On a board, you talk to him for a half an hour. Me, you talk to for 5 minutes. The Satmar Rebbe told him something. He said, after 120 years old, when Mike Tress comes to heaven, they're going to say, Rabbi Yid, who is the bard? Rabbi Yid, where's your beard? After 120, when you come to heaven, they're going to say, beard, where is the Jew?
Wow. Okay, what an important lesson. I really appreciate that. Rabbi Jacobson, this has been very, very moving for me personally, and really, I've been inspired by what you said. There's a lot here to think about, and I'm sure that my listeners will get a huge amount out of this. So I really appreciate your talking to me. I appreciate Rabbi Shapiro putting us in touch with each other, and
Thank you.
I thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.